A very good evening to you. Welcome to another edition of Hot Button Issue right here on Choice Television with me, Timothy Polion. In a moment, I'll be introducing my special guest. We conclude at about 15 minutes after 10 o'clock with the clip that peaked. It was the island's first Nobel laureate, Arthur Lewis, who once said, "The fundamental cure for poverty is not money, but knowledge." And of course, I'm sure that we could all agree, referring there to education. The education of a nation will certainly lead inevitably to its success. Leading that particular challenge, it's a huge one, is of course the island's education minister. And he's my guest on this evening's Hot Button Issue. Welcome to the program, Dr. Robert Lewis.
Thank you very much, Tim, and it's always a pleasure for me to be on a program, whether with you, wherever it is, so I really appreciate it.
And thanks so much for making your second appearance on this television program, Hot Button Issue. Considering what we have attributed to Sir Arthur Lewis, that the fundamental cure for poverty is not money, but knowledge, where are we right now as far as educating the nation's people?
Well, first of all, let me say that we ought to be very proud of the government of St. Lucia for what successive administrations of this country has done. They have done with the education of our children. I just earlier in June went to a Commonwealth conference in the Bahamas, and one of the issues that was actually discussed was they were looking at the percentage of the national budget that the Commonwealth countries spend on education. And St. Lucia was one of three countries at the top of that list that successive administrations have spent between 14 to 17% of the national budget on education. That means we ought to be proud of our system, what we've done. When you put St. Lucian students on a competitive level in terms of tertiary education, our students do not lag behind with students from the developed world. In fact, the records will show that St. Lucians who have gone to study outside of St. Lucia, when you actually measure them among, or you compare them with others, we ought to be very proud because it means that our system, the foundation of education, is very solid in our country. I'm a proud product of the St. Lucia education system, and I make I'm not ashamed about it because I know that we can compete at the best, at the highest level. With those of us who've gone wherever we've been, I know that we've done well. So what I'm saying is, we ought to really, for a small country, really be proud of ourselves. We know a lot more can be achieved. There's no doubt that you can always do better. But when we look at our primary education through secondary and onto tertiary level, I think we can stand our own as a small developing country.
With regard to the finances that are being utilized to basically finance education in St. Lucia, say that governments on the whole in St. Lucia, whether it's the government of the SLP or United Workers Party, they have performed creditably. They have done very well. At this point in time, we're talking about harsh economic times, limited finances. How are we doing in terms of using our precious resources and investing it in education? Are there cutbacks?
I don't think really, no. I think quite honestly, the budget for education actually increased this year. It is a matter of the different areas that you have to fund. Because if you look at our country, the more and more that our education evolves, is that you're going to find there are different things to address that you didn't address probably 10 years ago or you didn't address 2 years ago. I mean, for example, you can take an expenditure, for example, where the government has moved to provide computers, laptops for every child in the system, where the government has moved to provide a $500 bursary for every parent whose child enters secondary school. These were not areas that we were funding, let's say, 3-4 years ago. So obviously, it's not that there have been any cutbacks in the system per se. There would be a reprioritizing of the education budget. One of the areas would be, for example, people keep talking about transportation subsidy. 10 years ago, when we had less secondary schools in the country, there was more money put into transportation of students around the country. But as you have more secondary schools built in, for want of a better word, more remote areas in the country, obviously one of the things that we have to do is try to encourage more people to go to school in areas closer to them, because then you can use some of that money that you do in transportation, you can put it in other fields, in other sections.
But
of
you know,
the
people are
system.
talking about prominent schools, and
Yes.
somebody might be living in V4. They would not want to attend, let's say, the comprehensive school. They prefer to attend a more prestigious secondary school, like the St. Mary's College and the St. Joseph's Convent. Is that serving as an inhibiting factor in terms of ensuring that all the schools are seen on the level playing field in terms of their performance, in terms of the quality of the teachers that are there, and in terms of the various material that they have to work with?
No, that's a very complex issue to discuss. Quite honestly, I will never make it look like it's a very easy issue. I think, number one, if you look at the primary education sector, if you take all the schools, your children are coming from a cross-section of all the schools. And if you look at them, more than anything else, the schools are almost on parity in terms of students, because parents are not really choosing the RC boys necessarily because they think that this is the best school. I think most times they choose the schools that are closest to their homes. So a child in Vieux-Fort may go to Peru in Vieux-Fort North.
But my estimation, the RNC Boys is the best school, huh?
Well, I want you to say that because for me, as you said,
Right.
Cicero Combined is the best school because I went to school, and I agree. What I think is happening is you've looked over the years, and the schools sometimes, some of the schools that we consider as lower tier schools, they have teachers who are better trained or more credentialed than some of the schools that we call. There is going to be a tradition that people went to St. Mary's College and some people went to St. Joseph's Convent and they were train the children. Now, these schools have a reputation. You can't take it away from them. This is the nature of life. And it's just like the Harvards and the Yales. Everybody wants to go
But
to
on the
these
basis
schools.
of getting the best students anyway.
And exactly. If you keep putting the best students into St. Mary's College and into St. Joseph's Convent, you automatically expect to have the best results. But if you have people going into schools in the country because of, like on a zonal basis, pretty soon you'll begin to see the disparity really be getting smaller and smaller, because what you'll have is you'll have a greater and a better average, a mean of students throughout the system. So you're right. I mean, St. Mary's College, that's my old school, and I'm not going to hit St. Mary's College. But the point is St. Mary's College gets some of the best students, so that these students, the majority of the students at St. Mary's College already have the right aptitude towards learning. Whereas if you put all the other students in a particular school and that is where you put them, you're really saying, this is your lot.
But isn't that doing something to the psyche of our students?
Well, there's no doubt. I mean, it does, because it
But
demotivates a lot of your teachers.
Isn't that cruel?
I don't think it's cruel. I just think, to be fair, I just think the system needs to evolve to a point where you have full zoning, that people go to school where in the areas where they live. But the problem will lie, again, with St. Mary's College and not so much St. Joseph's Convent, but St. Mary's College. How many people live in VG? Then you'll have to begin to think of all the people in that area, Vidbotey, Leclerc, these areas. So until we can begin to come with a system, and it's not going to work overnight, I'll be honest with you. I believe in the element of choice, that people have choice, and if they decide, and as I'm thinking, these are some of the critical issues for us, because when somebody wants to go to St. Mary's College, and you live in, let's say, an hour from St. Mary's College, you don't have the money to get to St. Mary's College, and then you need the government now to pay for you to go to St. Mary's College, you begin to understand that you're putting pressure on the public purse. So there are a number of different factors that we need to discuss when we're looking at that. But to be fair, I will never reach the point where I'm supporting, I'll be honest with you, full zoning. I believe that people have choice, that they should be given choice. If you want to go to St. Mary's College and you have the capacity to do so, I believe you should.
I'm sure it will appear as a grand idea, but long term, can the Ministry of Education make a determination as to do the necessary remodification in terms of the rebranding of our secondary schools, so that everyone will see all our secondary schools as top schools, as prominent secondary schools?
I think the ministry, it's not the ministry, you know, Tim. As a former teacher, schools must celebrate their success. Let me take a school for you that people think is really not a school they want to go to. And it's a shame. But if you take a school like George Charles, There are so many strengths at George Charles. George Charles excels in areas, for example, like drama. They excel in art. We mustn't see education as just an academic pursuit. We must see education as what your old alma mater says, not for school but for life. An institution that prepares you for life. So what I think most of us do when we think about school is only the academic aspect of it. But if you take each of the schools that people, for example, you can take Marigot. Marigot has an excellent program in a number of areas like music and so on. They excel in different things. But these schools need to begin to promote and celebrate their success. St. Mary's College and St. Joseph's Convent have become household names in this country because of, let's say, longevity. They've been there for the longest, they're the oldest schools. But if you look at them, you will find that the principals of these schools and the students, they're on television, they're on radio, promoting their school, saying this is the best school. And if you look at Vieux Fort, it's really rivaling that the Vieux Fort Secondary School has been an excellent school, and it tells you it's the best school in the country. Now, when more schools begin to showcase what it is that they're doing, I think you're going to see that people are going to begin to see that these schools are on the same level. And I think the point you're making is, when we look at the qualification of teachers in the system, some of the best teachers might not necessarily be at St. Mary's College in terms of credentials. And even in terms of facility, I can tell you that Marigot probably has some of the best facilities in this country. I mean, I don't want to harp on St. Mary's College because it's my old school, but St. Mary's College at one time, when you talk about lab space or lab equipment, when I was a student, it wasn't really so much that there was such equipment. It is just that the students were already prepared to move on. And therefore, these students could go on because their parents will pay. And I'll tell you, even now, the parents pay a lot of money for their children who are at these schools. My daughter just left St. Joseph's Convent. I would have paid in excess of $1,200 a month to make sure that she has the best training that she could get, because their parents were going to be able to do it. But you see, that's what they call the social capital. And it is a matter of the disparity in what different people can do for the children. And it is not necessarily the schools that are creating that disparity, but it is what parents can afford for their children. And I'm telling you, there are a lot of issues. I am not going to tell you that I have a handle on all these issues. I don't think so. And every teacher can tell you they have. Nobody can say they have. But we must, as you say, I think throughout the last 20 years, I would say, various administrations have tried their best to ensure that all the schools have the basic amenities, whether it's the labs, to ensure that students, when they go to these schools, they can feel comfortable that they can take the subjects that they ought to.
Universal secondary education was introduced by the previous St. Lucia Labour Party administration. What we're hearing over the last few years is that some of the kids just cannot cope. I mean, kids, for example, would have scored 10 and 15% at common entrance and even lower are being assigned to a secondary school. Is there any need, several years after USC, to review that system with the determination to ensure that you make the necessary adjustments and changes?
No, I think with everything in education is a dynamic system. You have to review. I don't think the review is about whether children are ready. I think what we have to do now, you see, most of the students who were prepared in primary schools to go to secondary school, the teachers had, let's say, about 40 students in the class. If the teacher was trying to prepare these students for secondary school, and then you have the issue of which school do you go to, and there are going to be students who are ahead of the curve. Most of the attention is paid to the children who are advanced. And therefore, from the primary level, sometimes in grade 2, grade 3, some children have been left behind in terms of their capacity to read, for example. Because sometimes, and in all fairness to a teacher who has 40 students, trying to say, I want to compete, is a competition that's going on. Because everybody wants to ensure that their school sends all the students.
Yeah, but no child should be left behind.
Well, exactly.
Minister, right?
So I'm saying now, what we have to do, this is what the ministry is doing, paying great attention to the lower grades, because you must make sure with the minimum standards that all your children, by the time they're at grade 2, that they're able to read. and they're able to
What is the
recover.
basis of having the minimum standards test?
Well, the basis was
When again the kids are not, a lot of them are slow and they're not getting they're not getting the necessary assistance
no,
to
I don't.
improve.
I wouldn't say that. To be honest with you, I think we're hitting, and I'm going to say that consistently. I think we're hitting our system badly in this country. We have seen tremendous progress over time. Clearly, the minimum standard examination was not meant to be an exam that tells you more than whether your students had met the basic requirements of education. 60% of the curriculum, when you assess them, that you could say that these students in grade 2, yes, they have met the 60% of the curriculum. When I became minister, one of the things I said is, we ought not to have a league table for the minimum standards, because you can't come and try to compare schools on a minimum standard. If you're doing that, you actually have, all you're doing is you're creating a system where you're only looking to have schools compete against each other. What you want, if the school in Delsey, Choiseul, all the students in grade 2 can read at that level, we should be happy. And that is what we want to make sure is happening. All the students are numerate up to grade 2. All the students. So a system, the minimum standard is really just to be checking the system, to know where your students are at, not really to compare them with other schools. And I resent that. I do not like the idea that they're putting a league table forward in the ministry saying which school. And you've seen that it's been disbanded. We now want to talk about school A has 65%. They've met the national level, the national mean. School B
But
fell
once you
below
have
that.
determined that certain students are weak in some areas, what do you do with those students?
Now, that is where the schools come in. There's no way the Ministry of Education can do that for a school. Every school needs to use the results coming out of these minimum standards to identify the weaknesses of the students and to ensure that you work to eliminate.
Is that being done, Mr. Minister?
It is not. Is it always been done?
Is that being done?
I would say majority of schools do it, but we want to see a lot more effort, because right now you have more teachers who have been trained to do that. And if people are going to expect a ministry to come and do that for you, then the principal, there is no educational leadership. The principal and the staff need to sit and to ensure that it's done. For example, at St. Mary's College, I'll take St. Mary's College, I was there for 15 years. St. Mary's College, we sat down. There are problems at St. Mary's College. You have to evaluate where you are also. And every school must do that, because if you don't do that, what you're going to find is that you'll never know where your school is at.
We're talking education, and this is Hot Button Issue. My guest this evening, Education Minister Dr. Robert Lewis. We'll continue the discussion in just a moment. Welcome back, and thank you so much for staying with us. You're watching Hot Button Issue on Choice Television. My guest this evening, Education Minister Dr. Robert Lewis, is also responsible for human resource development, and that's very interesting. Doc, long term, I see that the Ministry of Education recently unveiled a new 5-year education sector development plan. Long term, what do we want for the people of St. Lucia? We do not have commodities. And we keep on saying that the human resource, that's all we have. What are we doing to nurture those people? So we have scientists, we have people who can invent things to take us out of the rut that we are in right now, economically and otherwise. Because it was just recently that Sir Hilary Beckles of UWI said, you need a culture of innovation driven by research and creative new industries and create new products and to revamp the tourism plant. Unless you have the culture of research, you are not going to get the economic stimulation you need to do things differently.
Well, I'm happy you're saying that, because you already addressed the issue of the Education Sector Development Plan. Now, let's first of all say that an Education Sector Development Plan will have new emphases, it will have new focus, but education will continue to be what education is, to plan for a period. But I think the point you ask is very important. If you look, we're moving to an ICT age where the cutting edge now, what education is driven by, is trying to integrate information communication technologies into our education system. And therefore, you want, because the way the world is going, as you rightly said, it's going towards this new technology. And if you can introduce your children to that technology very early, because that technology you can be on the same level playing with anybody anywhere in the world once you have the infrastructure in place. So the concept of innovation is something that is what education is about. We have to, for example, when we give the first set of laptops to students in 2013, the ministry tried to put in that, because we were working with Trinidad and Tobago, the ministry tried to put in that on that laptop certain barriers to social media. So you had blocked off the social media. But what did we find out? That the young people, within less than 24 hours of receiving these laptops, they were able to bypass these locks because of the creative minds that they have. I do not think it is I think it's not that because we don't have people who are not thinking. I think it's just a matter we have not tapped that particular resource properly. Because some people are still in the mode of teaching as if I am the facilitator, I know everything, and therefore all you have to do is listen. Teaching has to become more driven by being student-centered, to let students also explore. So there must, and I'm not telling you that I have everything in my head clear about it, but there must be now, the curriculum has to change in some ways, where we have labs, where students can actually use the information that they have to create new resources. And I think what you're saying is, so Hillary is making the point.
Yeah.
We don't have a culture of research in this country. Look at Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, our flagship institution. Sir Arthur ought to be an institution where there is research, because you cannot continue along the same line of just disseminating information, preparing people just in the mundane areas. We have to be in a position where we can actually say, these sort of researchers coming out of Sir Arthur, agriculture, they're saying that this is what we can do. Now, this is
Does
why
the school have the resources to deal with that? Because you're talking against the background of what happened recently with the students and the increase in tuition fees, and then there was protest action.
But again, here's the increase in tuition fee to try to get some of the resources that they need to do that. Because let's be honest, the government of St. Lucia, Sir Arthur's budget probably, if it's done, if you think about it, could be somewhere in the vicinity of, let's say, $18-19 million. The government contributes approximately between $15.2 and $16 million a year. Now, what Sir Arthur has to do is to find ways to raise the rest of the capital, because the government will not be able, and successive governments, as I said before, they've put in that sum of money into Sir Arthur. But if Sir Arthur wants, this year Sir Arthur took 100 more students. Let's say at the DAGS alone, that is the Division of Arts, General Science, General Studies, you're going to see that if Sir Arthur wants to have a new lab, clearly the cost of education has to increase, because when you look at Sir Arthur, compare that to any of the community colleges in the Caribbean, Sir Arthur really is still at a very low level.
But what if the parents cannot afford it?
Yeah, well, this is where educational planning comes in. And I've been very critical of that. I see St. Lucians, everything goes up. The cost of alcohol goes up. And I don't see St. Lucians cut back on the amount of alcohol they consume. You have to think about the cost of education to your child. Education must not be because I have a child, and when the child gets to Form 5, that's when I begin to think about her. I have 2 children, and I'm not trying to suggest that I have the same problems, or everybody has the same problems I do. But I have my own challenges too. But I have to begin to think, my daughter is going to leave Sir Arthur in 2 years' time. I have to begin to plan what it means for the cost of education. That if I'm going to save $100 for her every month, which I've been doing since she was born, I'm not saying it's 100, but I've been saving, because there must be a plan in my head for my daughter, because nobody's going to, I can't depend on the government to train her up to the tertiary level. I have to have a plan. So I remember Jerry George began this issue about educational planning in this country, asking parents, begin to plan for your children. I'm telling you, it's something we have to prioritize because SAFA has told us, we know it. Education is the greatest leveler. It is the only advantage we can get on in the world, in the sense, because we don't have certain physical resources. What we have is our people. We have to plan for our children. If we're going to spend maybe $40 in, let's say, alcohol consumption, you probably can say 10 of these dollars, I'll put it aside for my child from the time he gets to kindergarten. Because you must begin to plan for your children.
But shouldn't somebody lead the charge on this particular issue? Because
Yes,
Lee Kuan Yew would have led the charge in Singapore with regard to education. And also, if the government does not do it for the students, don't you think that even the students right now, in terms of investing in their education, the students will also grow up not appreciating it and also will invest in the imbibing of alcohol? And then you just have the situation will never change. So shouldn't the government on this particular matter take the charge on it?
I'm not running away from what you're saying. But I think there is something that comes to personal responsibility. The government is an entity. And who's the face of the government? The government does the best it can. At the moment, they are a free institution that's supposed to help society be properly organized. Whether you think about it, the home, the school, the church. At the moment, the home is very much dysfunctional in our society. There's very little support that teachers and schools get from the home. I mean, it has dwindled. The school is still the bastion, about the only bastion of support that children have. Now, what I'm saying is, you can't expect a government to do everything for you. What people have to do seriously is to begin to prioritize what is it that we want. We are raising children, and we have to tell ourselves, the government and the people, the taxpayers can do 70, 80% of funding, because education in this country is practically on taxpayers. Whether you think about it, textbooks, school books, uniforms, corporate sector gives a huge chunk every year. And that's why I want to say thank you to them, the corporate sector, the government. What people have to do is take personal responsibility for the education of their children. And the state will do the rest.
What about the single parents who are watching this broadcast this evening of 2 kids? They're proud of those kids. They have gone to primary, secondary school, and they really want those kids to go on to the South Louis Community College. But they just cannot afford it. They don't even have enough to plan for the kids' education. Those things happen.
I want to tell you, don't be fooled because as if today is the first time this happens. I want to say, and I said that in Vieux-Fort today, I went to school at Cicero Combined, barefooted. I have no shame about this. My parents just could not make it for the 10 children they had. I went to school barefooted. But my parents valued education. We went home for lunch, and what we had for lunch was either we were going to have mangoes for lunch, ripe bananas for lunch, or we were going to get a little pint of farine. I'm not telling you not parents who trying, What I'm saying is...
But in your case, you're talking about parents, your mom and your dad.
Yes.
Invariably, there are a lot of cases where you have just a female in the house, just a mother.
In the 1960s who grew up, my generation, 70s, they were single parents. I can tell you that, and we all know that. What I'm saying is this, and I'm getting a little thing about it because it's a passionate issue. These issues have been there. What we have to tell persons is this. We are aware, and the government has so many things. SAFA lists the bursaries. There are about 200 students at SAFA who want bursaries from the government of St. Lucia. Now, that is a big chunk of students because clearly successive administrations have recognized that there are people. What we have to do, Tim, I think, is to find a better way of ensuring that the people who get the bursaries are indeed the people who deserve the bursaries. Because what you find is happening in our country, and a lot of people don't talk about it because they're not frank about it, but I'm frank. I don't have problems facing the music. A lot of people give people who do not deserve bursaries. Some people give people books that the government are giving as bursaries who don't deserve it because some of these people are working and they can do it. It's a matter of friendship in our country. There is no justice in our land because what we do is we give to our friends. Because when these programs like the school bursaries in terms of books and uniform, SSDF busted the budget this year to just make sure as many parents could get books, uniforms to send their children to school. But what you find happens sometimes, and I'm not saying all the time, But sometimes there are people who do not deserve to have a bursary, who get these bursaries, and then they have children now who deserve these bursaries, they are left out. What we have to do is we have to work a lot harder to ensure that everybody who gets a bursary gets it either one on merit and two based on need. And that's why I like what the Social Transformation Ministry has done. They have relooked at how people get assistance in this country, because sometimes there's a duplication. You might have SSDF doing, Ministry of Education doing, and one person gets help from 3 different sources, and it's unfair to another parent who gets no help.
Are you hoping to rectify the problem or the issue at the South Louis Community
The
College?
issue at SAFA was, let me just say what the issue at SAFA was. SAFA wants to implement a new system. They want to implement a system where you pay according to the cost, the number of courses you take. So you pay per credit hour. What does American universities do? So you are at SAFA and you take in what we call 3 courses, and each course meets 3 hours a week. So you'll say it's a 3 3-hour courses, so 9 hours. So what you will do, you'll pay, every course is going to be per hour. Now, there are students who take 18 hours, there are students who take 6 hours, but everybody pays the same price. What SAFA wanted to do this year was to move to a system like this. But unfortunately, SAFA started there. SAFA did not start that process early enough to sensitize the St. Lucian public to that. And that's when the Cabinet of Ministers stepped in. When the proposal came to the Cabinet in June, the Cabinet would say, look, you cannot do it at this time because St. Lucians have not been properly sensitized on the new system. And rightly so. SAFA needed to do a little more PR on that. So the government said that you cannot implement the system. But SAFA, knowing that they had a problem, that they were going to feel that they were taking more students, the amount that the government has given them has stayed practically flat, the same. What SAFA did was to increase the tuition fee by $350. Now, to rectify that, it is not so much, we all have, the government has to look at it, but SAFA now needs to find new ways to raise funding, because SAFA has is in a unique position to develop certain partnership with corporate St. Lucia where they can generate more income for their program. For example, SAFA has a farm, and that farm has been successful in that it has been able to generate. But whether SAFA is able to sustain that, that's another question. I'm sure you can look at SAFA and say, SAFA used to have these evening programs. How many of these programs do they run presently to generate more income? So all this they have to begin to, and that's why I have pushed the board, and I must say thank you to Miss Anthony, Fortuna Anthony, who has been she's been relentless in ways that she can raise funding. She's gone outside of St. Lucia. She has had, as you remember, they've had at least 2 fundraising activities where they had a dinner, they had a show, and now I know they're sourcing funding outside of St. Lucia for SAFA. Education is a very costly venture. We understand it very late in this country. The Bajans understand that. 2 years ago, the Bajan government, owing the University of the West Indies some $200 million, didn't they move to say, look, the government of Barbados just cannot continue to allow every student of Barbados to go into university the way it was happening, that people could spend as amount of time they have, because they realize that education is costly. So what I'm saying here, I agree with you, we have to rectify it, but that has to be dealt between the board of SAFA and the ministry through the government to say to SAFA.
Talking about university education.
Yes.
Any efforts to transform the South Louis and cause it to be a university?
Well, it's not. Well, it's going to fall. There's the plan of the colleges. There's a plan that most of the community colleges are going to become part of what you call of the UE system, in that you become a university college where you can take programs of the university and then you can begin to give degrees from the university. Or the plan is also for SAFA to give programs with other schools to bring down their own to other programs and to develop their own programs. So it's not going to be just to become a university, but you can have degrees. We already have SAFA giving the full degrees right here. All we have to do is SAFA must be in a position where it has the resources to do that. Because at the moment you begin to say you want to move to a university, automatically the resources you need are going to be greater, because people are going to say, if you move me to the university level, even the lecturers will say, you need to pay me at a higher level. So I'm just saying, yes, these plans have been ongoing. And I must tell you that this board has been working very hard to ensure that all the systems are in place to ensure that SAAFA can begin. For example, SAAFA has begun doing a lot of things. This year, for example, SAAFA is doing, for the first time, a program in early childhood education with Seneca College in Canada. Here's a program where people who are untrained in early childhood education will be able to go to SAAFA, whether for part-time, and then to get trained in early childhood. Because I know I've gone away from what you asked, but it's to show you that if your early childhood providers are not trained, the foundation has not been laid, because 90% of the early childhood sector in this country are run by private individuals.
Well, when we come back, you'll be part of the discussion by calling this broadcast to pose your questions and comments to my guest. He is Education Minister Dr. Robert Lewis, right here on Hot Button Issue.